Hi there, this is Tracy Harrison from the School of Applied Functional Medicine. I want to dive right in. Many of you have been a member of our community for a while, and you know that here that at SAFM, we're very passionate about blending the deep dive into the biochemistry and the physiology of functional medicine science. We like to put on our geeky glasses and dive into what is the cutting edge of science telling us today about the interconnectedness of the body and this epidemic of modern diseases that we wrestle with as a society. But at the same time, we balance that with practical insight into the day-to-day lifestyles and choices that the people we serve in our practices are actually making that we know are predisposing them to disease, and in many cases actually constructing a framework for disease on an ongoing basis. And so today I want to talk about true root causes, because we often find at SAFM that many progressive practitioners in the world of functional medicine deeply enjoy living on that cutting edge of science, right? And believe me, I'm not judging, because the geek in me loves that too. And it's always so fascinating to understand what we're learning about the latest known SNPs, right? Fairly common genetic abnormalities or polymorphisms, right? That lead potentially to certain types of dysfunction, or we're learning about the effects, systemic effect of certain drugs, or unusual combinations of symptoms. And we can spend a lot of time kind of geeking out on that more extreme of functional medicine science. But today I actually want to bring us back into kind of the heart, the 2/3, 3/4, the heart of what is actually at the root of disease for the people that we serve. While certainly many of you may be involved in various modalities in acute or emergency medicine, and you have a focus on definitely trying to counter something episodic, right? An acute infection, an injury, an accident, right? Something that someone is wrestling with. And that takes a completely different type of healthcare, a different application of medicine than the bulk, as I said, 3/4 of people who come to our practices who are struggling with the epidemic of modern lifestyle diseases. I know it's interesting. I found out several months ago about the new ICD-11 guidebook, right? The Diagnostic Guidebook that's going to go into effect in the year 2022. Well, I was already a little shocked that we had nearly 20,000 different labels for dysfunction in the body. But turns out with the ICD-11 guidebook, we're going to have over 50,000 labels of things that can go wrong with the human body, right? Diseases, disorders, syndromes, definition of badness, right? All of these different permutations of symptoms that we can give a label. But as we well know through the functional medicine lens, that just because you can give a widely agreed label to the collection of symptoms that someone is struggling with does not at all mean that you know what is causing it in that unique person, much less what is actually going to help that unique person to reverse the actual root causes that are at play so that the pattern of dysfunction actually goes away. Not as being managed, but actually goes away. And so much of this is in the also in the lane of creating better health, because in the same sense that having a healthy lawn, right, with nice fertile soil and mineral rich and microbe rich and the appropriate pH and good water and good oxygen, a good healthy lawn will naturally repel the presence of weeds, because health repels disease. And so much of the medicine that these patients and clients with lifestyle disease need is about promoting more health that will allow them their bodies to come back into a natural balance of vitality. But here at SAFM, we talk about a number of different foundational models that I have found to really be transformative for health over the years. And one of them is our 3 aspects of wellness. And this is a combination of helping our patients and clients to maximize what the body actually needs to truly thrive, minimize what is in the way of the body functioning optimally, and then prioritizing an environment for healing. And I would actually assert to you that the vast majority of what is at play in this bulk of people who seek out our support in terms of overcoming various states of disease is about a failure to maximize what is needed, minimize what is harmful, and prioritize an environment for healing. And I want to delve into some examples, some straightforward ones, but also some that might surprise you about these three aspects today. The first one I think is very straightforward. We think about it all the time in the world of integrative or functional or natural or holistic medicine and health. And it's about maximizing what is needed, giving the body what it needs. It's about nutrition, right? We don't just consume food for calories. We consume food for nutrients. And as I like to tell our students here at SAFM all the time, it's not like we have this kind of like pantry of nutrients back here in our left butt cheek where the body just stores extra minerals and extra vitamins and extra phytonutrients so that when you decide to eat crap food for a few weeks in a row, it's just going to pull some extra zinc and some extra B6 and some extra astaxanthin and some different carotenes, right? It's not just going to pull them out of storage. We require getting a steady state supply of those nutrients in order to help the body to thrive. And so many of the people that we have in our practices are in this crevasse, right? Where they're getting enough nutrition to survive, but they're not getting enough nutrition in order to thrive. And this is a big problem because through the conventional medical model, we only think of two realities. Either a nutrient is deficient, right? Which means that it's in typically outside of the lower control limit of the reference range for nutrients if they're being measured, which basically means it's like the lowest 2.5% of the population. But of course, as we well know, there's a lot of sickness inside reference ranges. And so it's not black and white. It's not about being overtly clinically deficient and then being fine. It's about this entire gap, this spectrum between being barely sufficient enough to survive versus having truly optimal levels, surplus levels of nutrients that will actually allow us to thrive. And we well know that when you don't have enough nutrients, the body is going to, in its own wisdom, prioritize use of a nutrient for the most critical functions. And so we lose nutrient focus on a lot of those things that help us to truly thrive and feel great because the body is prioritizing those nutrients for things to help us just get by, just to survive. And so, yeah, food matters in a big way. And while supplements can be useful for particular applications, especially if they resonate with a given patient or client, supplements, my friends, will never, ever, ever be a substitute for food. And so if we want to help people to get well, regardless of your healthcare modality, we've got to get back to the fundamentals of consuming whole natural food and providing support, whether that detailed support comes from you or for someone else in your practice, whether it's a nutritionist or a dietitian. Maybe cooking lessons, right, from a healthcare educator, maybe a health coach, but using the power of the multimodality team to help people fall in love with foods that they can find and afford and prepare and actually enjoy, right? It's not just a matter of throwing a meal plan at people. It's got to be practically applicable. It's got to be something they savor and find enjoyable and fun. So we've got to get back to the notion of whole natural food because we do an awful lot of things, even when we are eating whole natural food, that impair our ability to actually get those nutrients into our bodies, right? So, we talk all the time at SAFM about true root causes of disease. Sometimes they're in medications, right? Think about the huge spectrum of your patients who have been using, for example, proton pump inhibitor medications for years, not as they were originally intended for a short period of time to suppress stomach acid to help people recover from an ulceration or extreme gastritis, usually trying to eradicate an H. pylori infection. But people are chronically using proton pump inhibitors just to make it possible for them to keep behaving in a way that promotes chronic acid reflux so that they can kind of ignore it. But it's not a surprise. It's actually well acknowledged, even in the safety literature for the medication, that chronic use of these medications, you have high risk of having insufficient vitamin B12 or insufficient levels of a rich array of minerals, especially iron and zinc, or even worse, magnesium, which is already highly deficient in our food supply today because of topsoil erosion and lack of putting mineral-rich fertilizer back into soils through any type of traditional farming method. And so many of these individuals are struggling with suboptimal, or what I like to call insufficiency of B12 or magnesium or iron or zinc, right? If you take that type of person and maybe pair it with an individual who's thriving eating a vegan diet, but is eating a lot of foods that naturally occur in the vegan diet that are very high in copper, they may be struggling to get sufficient levels of zinc, and then that becomes a double whammy. Well, that's a problem because, again, we don't have extra zinc in our left butt cheek, right? We need zinc in order to provide a huge, rich array of functions in the body, right? So hundreds of enzymes in the body are zinc mediated. If you don't have sufficient zinc, you don't make those enzymes in sufficient quantity to help the body to thrive. You know, for example, a number of liver enzymes are zinc mediated enzymes. We need ample zinc in order to have a good, strong, but also balanced immune system. Particularly critical in terms of having this nice balanced immune system that is strong and potent for countering legitimate threats, like keeping viruses at bay, but being balanced so that we don't end up being under-responsive to microbial threats, but over-responsive to everyday environmental issues like normal flora and fauna in the environment and everyday foods. So zinc is not optional, right? But yet there are so many things that can impair that. And there's a rich list of these things, right? We know that use of oral contraceptives, right? Birth control pills pretty quickly and dramatically can deplete the body of vitamin B6. Well, if you don't have ample vitamin B6, it's the often forgotten B vitamin when we think about being able to methylate well, right? We methylate billions of times a second throughout the body, but we also have to methylate in order to make neurotransmitters, in order to make and break down hormones. We have to methylate to make glutathione. In order to counter intracellular oxidative stress in the body. Insufficient B6, insufficient glutathione, right? This is not complicated, right? It's like a seesaw. And if it's missing, then we're going to end up with a counterbalanced heavy dysfunction on the opposite end. And so nutrients matter, nutrient impairments matter. And the examples that I'm giving you are a wonderful follow through, a practical example of the fact that we are not what we eat. Nutrition is not that simple. It's not just a matter of finding a good food or a nutrient and popping it in your mouth. We are what we eat, digest, absorb, convert to active forms, and then get past the cell membrane. And that is a much higher hurdle than just a matter of chewing up and swallowing it, right? We're talking today in our practitioner forum about the impact of metformin, right? One of the medications for type 2 diabetes that actually has some level of efficacy in countering the true root cause of metabolic dysfunction, because it actually is improving insulin sensitivity. Well, we know that one of the harms of metformin that balances out the good is that it impairs vitamin B12 absorption from the GI tract, right? And this is actually a calcium-mediated impairment. So if you have insufficient levels of calcium and you're taking metformin, you're going to be a double whammy in terms of likelihood of insufficient levels of vitamin B12. And this is particularly harmful for individuals with type 2 diabetes because they're already prone to diabetic neuropathy, and having insufficient B12 makes them much more likely to struggle with neuropathy. And so these are root causes of disease, my friends. I can't tell you how often in my practice and in the thousands of cases that I've reviewed over the years with SAFM practitioners, we find that a medication, a period of stress, A 3-week change in diet, right, set off the cascade of badness that actually allowed a disease to precipitate. Taking a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug once or twice a day for a few weeks because of a tennis injury, that can promote disease because of its impact on the gut lining, both in terms of creating malabsorption of nutrients as well as, and we know this, creating enhanced intestinal permeability because the very specific anti-inflammatory action of the drug in the gut lining impairs the gut lining's ability to renew itself in terms of keeping a good, thick, supportive mucilaginous layer to protect the villi and microvilli underneath. And so these are things that matter in the world of maximizing what we need to thrive. But let's take it even further. It's not just a matter of nutrients or calories, right? What about oxygen? What about water? I'm amazed at how often healthcare practitioners don't think about the downstream systemic effects of low-grade dehydration. How often we are not drinking enough plain, clean water. I'm sensitive right now, even here in my office, to how much the water coming out of the tap in the bathroom, which is not filtered, reeks of chlorine that if I didn't know any better, I would be happily consuming, right? In my iced tea, in my coffee, in the stir fry I put together, right? And bringing on board this excess chlorine, which a lot of people are doing. And chlorine is a halogen, and it interferes with the action of other halogens like iodine, right? We're exposed to a lot of chlorine and fluorine and bromine, right? That can replace iodine, but create ineffective enzymes and proteins in the body. And so hydration matters, but what about oxygen? I want to tell you something you might not realize. Clinical study shows that on average, as many as 20% of people just in the random adult population have sleep apnea. Well, what happens when you have sleep apnea? You're deprived of oxygen for the duration of your sleeping hours, sometimes for fairly acute episodes, which is going to do what? Flood your body with adrenaline, right? Or depending on how severe it is, over time, it can also lead not only to adrenaline punches overnight, but chronically high overnight cortisol levels. Well, what does that do? It interferes with the secretion and uptake of melatonin, so you didn't sleep well in the first place. Now you really sleep poorly, right? And this becomes a systemic problem, right? We know that what happens when you have chronically elevated stress hormones, you end up with impaired immune functions. What's the first thing that happens when that takes place? Well, in my experience, one of two things. You either end up with sustained high viral load, in terms of active virus activity, or you end up with a chronic simmering dysbiosis, imbalance in the microbes in your gut. And if this is allowed to go on for an extended period of time, yeah, this creates disease in a serious way. And so we need to be on the lookout for sleep apnea. When people wake up in the morning and they feel exhausted, keep beginner's mind on why that is. Here's a pearl for all of you. Just because someone says, oh, no, I never wake up in the middle of the night, that does not mean they don't have sleep apnea. There are plenty of people out there who don't snore. Their sleep partner is not awakened by their behavior, and they're not awake. But if you put a sleep monitor on them, you will see very quickly just how frequently they stop breathing in the middle of the night. And so this is something to consider around the basket of things that can interfere with people's ability to maximize what they most need in order to thrive. Now, I want to shift from that to the notion of minimize, because this is the category that I think perhaps our patients and clients are most worried about. You certainly can't go to a blog site or pick up a newspaper or listen to the news on any given day without seemingly learning of something that you can seemingly die from. Yet another thing that gets added to that list of 55,000 credible diagnoses, right? Globally accepted diagnoses of things that can go wrong with the human body. It's crazy. But what happens? People have concerns. They have family histories. They read about something. What do? They get a beverage of their choice and they sit down and they Google, often for hours, about all of these different ways in which they could get sick or suffer or bring disability, lack of security to their family. This is a very real nocebo effect. And I think one of the greatest services that we can give to our patients and clients is actually educating them about the truth, that there's only so many things that can actually go wrong with the human body under the category of minimize. And while there are thousands of different items or versions of these categories, I believe strongly that there are actually only 5 things that can interfere with the body's natural vitality in terms of things that we would want to minimize. And that is toxins, of which there are, of course, thousands and thousands and thousands of toxins. Toxins can be endogenously produced, by the way, not just exogenously brought into the body, whether it's through inhalation or swallowing or skin absorption. But we also have endogenous toxins, things like lipopolysaccharide. And this, by the way, is a way in which disease can begin in the body. And so when we think about disease beginning in the gut, there are multiple ways in which it can happen. We know that people don't need to have that severe of a dysbiosis or imbalance in the microbiome that is including some surging populations of some opportunistic species. We can end up with pro-inflammatory lipopolysaccharide getting overexposure to our immune system and even absorption, if there's enhanced intestinal permeability, into systemic circulation. And this is a key factor at a lot of diseases, anything from type 2 diabetes to fibromyalgia to rheumatoid arthritis to various autoimmune diseases, actually. And so taking care of minimizing stress so that our immune system remains strong, so that our we're able to counter microbial imbalances, but also minimizing medications that can damage the gut lining. Because yes, medications can be very helpful. They can be really life-saving. I'm not against pharmaceutical drugs. I just think they're overused and too often used as first-line therapy as opposed to a last resort when other lifestyle changes that would actually address the root cause have been exhausted. But if we have damage to the gut lining and we have enhanced intestinal permeability, then we get overexposure to the immune system and the systemic body to things that are basically designed to stay in the gut. And because of molecular mimicry, we can end up with pretty dramatic immune system responses. So toxins can be endogenously produced, but of course we know the lion's share of them are exogenously absorbed. Some of you have joined us for prior Facebook Lives here where I've talked about toxins and detoxification and how the body is really designed to actually handle some toxicity, for sure. The liver is an incredibly sophisticated and evolved organ. But when we slather so many toxins on our skin, we bypass the first hepatic screening, right, that would protect us. We're actually much more vulnerable to things we slather on our skin than things we put in our mouths, because at least we get a screening there courtesy of our microbial friends, the protective gut lining, and then the first pass hepatic circulation that would protect us from so much. But if you slather toxins on your skin, they get absorbed, my friends, and they go right into circulation. And we really shouldn't put anything on our skin that we aren't willing to eat. Maybe not from a flavor viewpoint, but from a toxicity viewpoint, because the skin is basically a giant mouth. And we have an epidemic of low-grade toxicity, whether circulating toxicity that's creating oxidative stress or even chronic low-grade inflammation, or stored toxins. We see this all the time. We know the body likes to preferentially store toxins in fat. Adipose tissue, it's what I call the fat closet, right? The body is very skilled and wise in understanding that toxins, once they've been in circulation for a short period of time, if the liver isn't able to handle them, either because of impaired detox pathways or because of a glut, right, an overabundance of toxins, then the body needs to do something to get rid of them. And for an awful lot of toxins, we can't just pee or poop them out, right? We have to have hepatic transformation, right? We have to change fat-soluble toxins to water-soluble toxins so we can actually get rid of them. And we have impaired pathways. Some of that is genetic driven. A lot of that is nutrient inhibited. Because again, no nutrients in the left butt cheek. We've got to maximize nutrients so that our detox pathways can be live, right? No B2, no B5, no glycine. We're not very skilled at glucuronidation. Low B6, insufficient glycine or zinc or selenium. We're not going to be very good at glutathione conjugation, right? Absolutely dependent. And so the body will store excess toxins in fat tissue. So what happens when you lose weight? It all comes out to be dealt with, or to not be dealt with, to be redistributed back into fat tissue, or even worse, to be redistributed to organs like the brain. So we want to make sure we're supporting people for detox pathways before we work with them on promoting significant weight loss. For that matter, when people have type 2 diabetes, actually adipose tissue, because of the dysfunction that happens metabolically in type 2 diabetes, individuals can actually have high insulin, high blood sugar, and high free fatty acids. Adipose tissue, even in a state of high insulin, when there's insulin resistance, will give up free fatty acids. And so it's dumping the contents of the fat closet, which often will bring along toxins for the ride. And so, yeah, toxins are an issue. And so educating your patients and clients about where they're getting those. Anything from choosing organic foods, to looking at what they're cooking and storing their foods in particular personal hygiene and beauty products. So that's one category that we want to minimize, toxins. The other one is allergens, which is really unique to a given individual. Although there are certainly certain things like mold that an awful lot of people are allergic to, but there are definitely pathways for reducing the hypervigilance of the immune system so that individuals can reduce or even put into remission their prior allergies or sensitivities. But in order to get that way, we have to first bring the immune system into a place of balance, especially so that the nervous system can calm down and stop feeling like it's under threat all the time. And so honoring allergies and sensitivities is a key tenet of wellness, right? We talk a lot about the stages of healing, and that there will be initial stabilization steps that are necessary, which is very different from the actual therapeutic intervention that would happen after that, which will be very different from the appropriate maintenance activities that will happen afterward. And if we are practicing thorough application of functional medicine science and whatever modality you practice, we're going to do all three of those things, right? Not just the stabilization, not even just the therapeutic, but all three stages, because at the end of the day, that is what is going to most help people to not only get well fully, but to actually stay well, rather than having a revolving door of illness. So allergens, the third thing is infections, right? And again, infections, it is quite normal to occasionally get sick. You know, keeping in mind that when you feel sick, when you get sick, you're not actually sick because of what the microbe is doing to your body. You're sick because of what your immune system is doing to your body. The reason you have a fever or aches and pains, or you're exhausted and you just want to go to bed, right? All of those things are basically about your body mounting an accelerated battle, right, against the microbe that it's concerned about. And it wants you to agree. It wants you to participate, to be a partner, not to work against it. It's trying to fight something. You're feeling sick. It's trying to give you some clues, right? But what do, right? We pop a couple of pills and power through, right? We don't stay home or sleep in or drink extra water, lay off of the crap food. No, we push the envelope, right? And your stress hormones go up and you limp through and you limp through. But what happens? You finally have vacation and then you get seriously sick. because your immune system was biding its time until you agreed. And you didn't agree to have your vacation commandeered by a big respiratory infection, but your immune system took it. And so we need to teach people that when you feel sick, it's not because your body's vulnerable. You feel sick because your immune system is strong and effective, and it's going to work on your behalf to counter an infection, to get rid of a fungal overgrowth, or to get rid of a pathogenic bacteria, or to reduce viral load and put the viruses back in their hiding places within the body. But infections, again, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of different flavors and varieties of infections, and even multiple infections, right? Where the body can end up struggling so much with a primary infection that we end up dealing with secondary infections that, oh, by the way, usually need to be dealt with first before you have a hope of eradicating the initial primary infection. But infections are a big deal, and we need to find the balance between allowing the body to occasionally get sick and fight something in a stronger way, which I believe is a key aspect of health, but not being sick on a frequent basis, right? So that we actually are taking good care of ourselves and allowing the immune system to do its job. Infections, key aspect of so much of what the individuals coming to us with chronic lifestyle disease are countering. So toxins, allergens, infections. The next one is stress. And I'm going to talk about stress as a huge category in just a second. But I think one of the most important things that we need to learn and reinforce with our patients and clients in a practical way is that when we are chronically stressed, the body is going to choose to put nutrients and blood flow and muscle contractions into physiological functioning that's promotes survival, not that promotes thriving. And so we have a lot of patients and clients who are making tremendous numbers of day-over-day choices that are basically telling the body, we're barely surviving, we better lock down and take care of the basics. But those same people who are making those choices, which I'll talk about more in just a second, are expecting to have this thriving kind of experience, right? I want to make choices that push my body into a sympathetic dominant reaction, right? But I want to have this parasympathetic experience, right? I want to be thin and have great skin and perfect digestion and fertility and great orgasms and low body fat and no aches and pains. I want to have all of that. But at the same time, I want to be able to make day-over-day choices that leave me in a place of being malnourished, poorly rested, highly stressed, chronic low-grade inflammation, chronic low-grade or maybe even high-grade oxidative stress and damage, chronic simmering infections, chronic nutrient depletion, right? All of these things that the body is perfectly happy to help you weather, but it is going to put your nervous system in a sympathetic dominant mode. And so it's important for us to educate our patients and clients in terms of anchoring their belief that the body is strong and not weak or vulnerable or against them, right? Nothing could be further in the truth. The very fact that we're sitting here through human evolution having this conversation is proof of just how strong the human organism is. But there's just a disconnect between the choices people are making and the life experience that they want to have. This is wonderful because you get to tell these patients, nothing's broken, nothing's wrong. There's not, actually, the body is working exactly as it was designed to work, right? It's emphasizing all of those sympathetic dominant functions in order to help you to get past the point of barely surviving, so that it can feel comfortable, it can feel safe, allowing you to be in a parasympathetic dominant nervous system mode, which is where all the yumminess is, right? That's where all of the fertility and the growth hormone and the feel-good neurotransmitters, right? The lower levels of stress hormones, the low body fat, the perfect digestion, right? That's where all of that is, right? The high levels of melatonin, so you sleep like a brick, right? The body is happy to do that. If it's not doing it, it's usually not because it's broken. It's very seldom because it's broken. It's just because it is following the cues and clues that we are giving it as it is trying its best to help us to live in the environment we're choosing. This is a powerful thing to educate patients and clients about, because when they're otherwise doing their hours of Googling online, it is fueling a nocebo effect that the body is really quite vulnerable, and the other shoe could drop at any day and they could get one of these 50,000 different diagnoses. It's another way to suffer and die. We have a problem with this in our society because it's contributing to sympathetic dominance. It's contributing to people's belief that the body is weak, and their expectations for sickness, and creating negative belief systems. Okay, so toxins, allergens, infections, and stress. And of course, the last one is trauma. Trauma can take many different flavors, just like all the other 4 categories that I mentioned. Trauma can be mental, emotional. It can be early life abuse that informs the amygdala, that is coloring people's lives, even in their 50s and 60s. It can be physical trauma, such as being in a car accident or falling and having a concussion, and realizing that those things have lasting effects on the systemic body, not just all of the body part that actually suffered the brunt of the harm, but the systemic body that has taken a cue. It has gotten educated based on that experience. It's also important to remember that trauma can be a surgical procedure. Surgery may absolutely be well indicated for what a person is wrestling with, but there's nothing parasympathetic dominant about being cut open, right? The experience of surgery, whether it's relatively non-invasive or more invasive, is traumatic. It is a form of trauma. And people need support for this, both in preparation as well as afterward. It's not just about ensuring that the wound heals properly and then checking that the operated on body part is actually functioning. We need to support someone who's been through surgery in the same way that we would support someone who's been through, say, a car accident and dealt with the multi-system skewing that happens downstream from that. So there are lots of different versions of these 5 things, but helping your patients and clients to understand that toxins, allergens, stress, infections, and trauma are really the things to focus on. And if you use that kind of narrowed funnel for which to look at assessing the root causes of disease for unique patients and clients, it can help to inform your assessment in order to help better focus on recommending interventions that will actually get at the root cause, rather than just band-aiding or managing the particular current manifestation. Now, there are other things that get in the way, right? So let's talk about things that we might want to minimize, like sugar. We're in the middle right now of a fully revamped, revitalized version of our deep dive clinical course, which is now named Reversing Metabolic Dysfunction. Previously, we focused on just reversing type 2 diabetes. But as we've understood more and more and more about just how early the metabolic dysfunction begins, often in the form of pancreatic insufficiency or low-grade levels of fatty liver or infiltration of the skeletal muscle with fat, and that can actually precede the development of any type of hyperglycemia, even the initial pre-diabetes. Dysfunction in the pancreas and the liver and the skeletal muscle may have started a decade before that, and we've got to get way more effective as a healthcare community at helping our patients and clients to identify that upstream and address it before someone has been dealing with the downstream effects of more than a decade of oxidative stress from elevated blood sugar. And so, yeah, we go upstream and absolutely talking about all the biochemistry, and, you know, I deeply enjoy educating healthcare practitioners about the role of bile, the role of the microbiome, the role of signaling hormones in the gut that affect the pancreas, and the massive amount of crosstalk that's happening with cytokines and myokines and adipokines, right? The body is like this incredible hot-wired internet where all the various anatomy and physiology is talking to each other. But we also need to go upstream and be able to tell folks sugar is way worse than we ever realized, right? And this is the kind of message that people have heard so many times, they're numb to it, right? You probably heard it so many times that you're numb to it. But this is a serious problem, because what is sugar? It's half glucose, it's half fructose. Glucose, the body has a lot of different ways to deal with. And certainly if we crazy overconsume it, that can absolutely lead to insulin resistance. But fructose is an evil unto itself, because where do we metabolize fructose? In the liver. And essentially only in the liver. So if I go to Starbucks and get a coffee drink that is a caramel macchiato or a mocha with an extra pump of lemon syrup, caramel syrup, what am I getting? A lot of sugar, a glut, and guarantee that it's going to be too much fructose in that moment, that acute ingestion, especially because it was liquid, so very little digestion involved. I get a surge of fructose going to the liver. The liver says, whoa, okay. So it uses a tiny amount of that fructose to restore the glycogen in the liver. And then folks, the only other thing that that liver can do with that fructose is convert it into fat. Right? This is not rocket science. It's not edge of technology at all. It's de novo lipogenesis. The body makes fat. The liver makes fat from fructose and sends it out to the rest of the body saying, whoa, fructose overload. You guys take this stuff. You guys take this stuff. And it's sending out all of this extra fat. And oh, by the way, when the body makes fat from fructose, it is making it specifically in the saturated form, right? That gets sent out, and depending on just how much you consume at a time, it's easy for the liver to get overwhelmed with de novo lipogenesis and packaging those saturated fats and the triglycerides and putting them into VLDL lipoproteins. And so what do we end up with? We end up with the initial stages of fatty liver. Just because we got on a new habit of having, quote unquote coffee drinks, which is really like a coffee ice cream pint in a cup from a different place, right? But people don't know this. They need this education. They need you to shake up the conversation and going beyond the same old saccharine, message around sugar is bad, right? We've got to get beyond that, because there is very real, devastating biochemistry behind the impact of having that as a habit. Now, at the same time, I think we need to educate people that, as I said earlier, the body's not vulnerable and weak. If you want to do this kind of thing every once in a while, no big deal. I like to say that health is 90% of what you do on a regular basis, because the body will handle 10% of craziness on an ongoing basis. The body will actually handle short periods of pretty acute malnutrition and trauma and infection and this kind of thing. But in exchange for that, in order to return to vitality, the body is going to expect you to actually allow rest, to allow a period of time where the body feels like, ooh, the war is over. Whoa, the war is over. Oh my gosh. And it will bring down the stress hormones, and you'll shift from sympathetic dominance to actually having more parasympathetic nervous system stimulation. And you know what? That's when the growth hormone actually surges, right? You have to be in a parasympathetic dominant mode in order to have growth hormone surges. You're not going to heal if you don't have growth hormone surges. And so people who have a revolving door of illness, they get well for a short period of time and then they just get sick again. They just get sick again. They just get sick again. There's a reason for that. And so we need to, when someone just isn't getting well, we need to go upstream and look at the effects of stress. Also look at the effects of cellular metabolism that may be promoting dysfunction over and over again, especially things like the revolving door of gut infections. Someone can do a stool test and they have this set of pathogens and they get addressed, and 4 to 6 months later, they test again and they got a different set of unwelcome guests and they address it. And this isn't good practice of functional medicine. Like, you just keep doing tests and take supplements and do tests and take supplements. And that may be necessary for acute intervention if someone is really struggling, but it can distract them from the more important upstream work that they may not want to do, which is about addressing the state of their stress, addressing the state of their sleep, and how low on their priority list sleep actually is. And so this takes me to my next category. We talked about what we got to maximize, things like oxygen and water and nutrients. We talked about things you want to minimize, things like trauma and stress and toxins and infections and allergens. Now I want to talk about prioritizing an environment for healing. You all know I'm a scientist, and as much as my brain would like to focus on the SNPs and the biochemistry and the conversions and the enzymes and the nutrients, the reality is, my friends, that what is most in the way of the people we serve from getting well, much less staying well, is a failure to consistently prioritize an environment for healing. And that is something that my head knows, but my heart really wants to sing. Because so often people are looking to be fixed. And even when they start to take responsibility for their health by really understanding how much their choices are causing disease for them, we've got to get them to a point of understanding that the softer side of their lifestyle choices absolutely can and regularly does create disease. This is about sleep, rest, purpose, connection with community, feeling accepted, self-worth and self-love. The body follows the mind and the belief systems, right? We know this. The placebo effect is not this hocus pocus, loosey-goosey kind of effect where I act like I feel better, so I kind of think I do because I'm just putting my head in the sand, ignoring what's going on with my body. I got news for you, friends. Placebo research is fascinating. Belief systems precipitate biochemical reactions and hormone secretions and neurotransmitter secretions and healing behavior. Our belief systems are hugely important. But as I said earlier, because of our tendency to want to make sympathetic dominant choices, but then expecting parasympathetic type of experiences. And basically, if we want to thrive in life, or we want to feel fantastic, and like I said, have great digestion, and have beautiful skin, and clean teeth, and no cavities, and all these kinds of things, we have to take care of the softer side of our lives. And so we have to prioritize sleep. There's no getting around it, right? People tend to think about sleep as being one of those things that you eventually succumb to when you can't keep your eyes propped up anymore. We celebrate who's more stressed. It amazes me seeing the number of people on social media who will jump on and talk about how stressed and miserable their lives are, and then other people jump on and basically spar for whose life situation is worse. How sick is our societal impression that somehow we're looking to win a badge of honor for whose life sucks more? Yeah, give me a heart if you see this in your communities. I see this in my friends. This is something we need to help people to understand. This is toxic. Fear is a toxin. Overwhelm is a toxin. Sleep is important. Sleep is just as important as water. This is hugely important, and we need to help people to prioritize sleep, to prioritize rest. And I remember one time one of my clients saying, okay, wait a minute. So when you say rest, are you implying that I'm supposed to have some kind of rest other than sleep? This is hilarious. You just can't make this stuff up, right? Yes, I'm implying that you might want to rest at some other time other than just when you finally give in and fall like a brick into bed and go to sleep within 30 seconds because your body is that deprived. The body needs rest. Your nervous system is incredibly well honed, and your nervous system is not really interested in how much you lie to your friends and family or yourself, or how much you want to look the other way about your stress level. Here's the thing, my friends, your nervous system knows exactly how stressed you really are. And it is planning to orchestrate your physiology accordingly. And so it doesn't really matter what you say. It matters what's actually going on. And so, yeah, things like snuggling with the pet, things like going for a walk, not a run, not a power walk, but a nice, relaxing constitutional. What happened to the constitutional, right? That went out the window with other rest, right? A small stroll after dinner, right? Not to burn calories, not to burn fat, not to check a box, not to get in your steps, right? But to just enjoy the evening air, to look at the stars, to step back from the day-to-day craziness and think about your purpose, your position in the bigger scheme of things, right? It's amazing how many of our patients and clients never make time for any of this. This, my friends, is medicine. This is very real medicine. And until we stop separating the geeky biochemical, enzyme-mediated, SNP-impaired, medication-induced aspect of things, until we stop separating that from lifestyle choices, and especially the softer lifestyle choices, we're never going to have legitimate health care. We're never going to have legitimate health care, and health care is not disease management. It is the return to and maintenance of true vitality. And if we want to make healthcare effective, not to mention affordable, we've got to bring these things together, which is why I love the notion, the promise of the most effective future of healthcare being in the multimodality team. I appreciate that you as a practitioner, at SAFM at any given time, we have between 16 and 20 specific healthcare modalities, right? We've got plenty of physicians and nurse practitioners and acupuncturists and chiropractors and all of that. We also have nurses and PAs, we got nutritionists and dietitians and health coaches and health educators and psychologists and therapists and midwives and pharmacists and bodywork specialists. Oh, we got them all, right? Because this science, this knowledge can fuel and ignite the effectiveness of all of those modalities. But I take that even further. All of these modalities are interacting internal to classes, and internal to case reviews, internal to our practitioner forum, sharing their expertise with each other. Because if we want that real integration, the bringing together of sort of the scientific world and then what we might think about as just our lifestyle, right? We've had a schism here for way too long. We've got to bring back the truth that health is about the integration of these things. And you don't have to do it all. Please don't try to do it all. Then you'll burn out and we'll miss you in the movement. We need multimodality teamwork, deep respect and teamwork. And whether you've got that in your practice or you refer out to get it, or you do grand rounds internal to maybe a clinic or a large healthcare facility, multi-practice facility, we've got to start having that integration, because we've got to be prioritizing an environment for healing. And yeah, creating a place where people can process their relationships. People can process that they continue to do a career that they can't stand. They continue to go to work every day to work for a boss that denigrates them all the time, or doesn't respect them, or doesn't give them opportunities for self-actualization. And we wonder why they have a crazy high cortisol awakening response that's promoting massively high first morning fasting glucose, even though their hemoglobin A1C is more moderate or even optimal. Yeah, that's a really good example of how the softer side of things is seriously informing the harder scientific side of things. This is the full functional medicine lens. This is true integrated healthcare. And so I want to encourage you to acknowledge that truth and to spread the word of that. Thank you for putting yourself out here on this cutting edge of the future of effective healthcare. I'm very grateful to each of you for doing this work. I know it can be lonely, it can be challenging, it can be intimidating. You have to really be committed. And so I really appreciate that at this point in the evolution, the very fact that you're here, you're committed, you're passionate. It's why I love so much creating a warm, respectful, supportive family of practitioners within the SAFM community, because we need each other in order to band together with our strengths in order to affect this transformation of healthcare. It's already started, my friends. It's not a pipe dream. It's already started, and I'm really delighted that you're here with me on this movement. Thank you so much. Have a great day.